again. Clearly a fairly dry time for me in terms of work, so I seem to have plenty of time for doing a spot of gaming, so I thought I'd try and capture some of it and post it online. Hopefully it is of interest to some of you. This time I'm looking at Ardennes 44. You may recall I'd just finished a couple of goes at Stalingrad 42, both the initial scenario and I also had a crack at the campaign scenario, which I very much enjoyed. I think I also mentioned that I had a few of these in the series, so I'm going through a bit of a Mark Simonich fest at the moment. Ardennes 44 came out before Stalingrad 42, and I had it in its first printing. I'm not even sure how long ago that was. I'm guessing 2005 or something. I played the original a couple of times, solo and face to face, and really enjoyed it. And for some reason skipped the second edition, and then jumped on the third edition when it came out. There've been a few changes. In fact, I think they've made some changes from 1 to 2, and then when they went to 3 they actually went back to the first edition for some of the systems. But I'm very happy to have the third edition in my collection. I think it's a very nicely produced game. Counters nice and thick, very clear. The map's nice. So it's one of GMT's, I think, one of their kind of a premier series of games that they've brought out over the years. Big fan of the Mark Simonich series. So I thought, as I'd just done 42, I'd have a go at the Ardennes 44 to see how that compared, and to see if it was as good as I remembered it to be. And I reckon it's still up there with the best of that series. Useful comparisons, I guess, would be things like complexity. Bizarrely, they both got the exact same page count in terms of the rulebook. They both come in at about 32 pages. This one feels a little bit more complicated, and I think that's because I think there's a number of factors that contribute to that feeling. And one is the scale. This is, it's 1.6 miles per hex rather than, I think it's about 10 miles in Stalingrad 42. I forget what Ukraine 43 is, or the game on Holland. So this is what, six times zoomed in on the Stalingrad map, and so that, along with the fact that it's obviously in the Ardennes, the terrain plays a more significant role, and takes a little while to get your head around. You do feel as though you're trying to manage a very a congested traffic jam, snaking through pretty poor terrain, which I guess if you get that feeling, that pretty much indicates that the game is working well, because that's essentially what it was like. So you've got to manage the terrain. There's a few more specialist units. You get to play sort of grief markers and traffic markers to give you some random snags along the way and trying to optimise your sort of traffic management issues. There's things like there's a sort of power drop for the Germans, which is pretty insignificant normally. The artillery rules for each side are slightly different. Essentially, the German artillery is very difficult to move about, and you have a number of sort of prime movers, which are essentially half tracks. The German army being split into 3 armies. So you've got the 7th Army in the south, and then you've got the 5th Panzer and the 6th SS Panzer Army in the north. and they have an allocation of prime movers, typically between 1 and 2 per army. So that really restricts moving your artillery forward to support the next line of to support the next attack on the next offensive line. So there's little bits of chrome in there, which I guess what one person might see as a bit of sort of fiddliness is another man's historical detail, and I think I'd probably fall into the latter camp. I don't mind a little bit of that, just to get a nice feel for the campaign, and some of the historical detail to me sits quite nicely at this scale. In terms of playtime, this is a 22 turn game for the base scenario. There is a patterns counter-attack optional add-on, but if you compare the two main campaign scenarios, this is 32. I think the Stalingrad one was either 32 or 26, so this is, on the face of it, about 2/3 the length, but I think probably in terms of playing time it's about the same, because there seems to be more to do across the entire front. Whereas I found in the Stalingrad game, you got sort of quiet sectors which you could pretty much ignore. Whereas this, there seems to be things going on pretty much everywhere. So I think the playtime will probably come out as being about the same. I think this would lend itself more to multiplayer. Having just said that the Stalingrad one has quite broad, quiet sectors, it means that you don't really need two players aside. You could certainly make that work if you definitely wanted to, but my thoughts would be, well, if you've got 4 players that want to play and you've got 2 copies of the game, then why not play two separate games? And there's talk of us doing that in a few weeks' time at a con where we did contemplate doing a 4-player, but you know what better than to do 2 games in parallel and compare the progress on both the maps as they sort of sit side by side. That to me is much more interesting than trying to shoehorn 4 people into a game, which maybe doesn't work too well. But I think in this one I can see 3 players certainly working well, because you've got the natural division with the 3 German armies, potentially also with the American forces. That you could make that work with 2, because again you need to be doing things over the full width of the front line. So 3 or 4 works better with this, I think, than with the Stalingrad game. And as to its physical size, well, it's slightly smaller than the Stalingrad game. I'm using the same 4x4 playing surface, and there's room to get both the maps on here, and some of the sort of play aid cards that list all the reinforcements that are coming on, and the turn record track as well. So if you've got a 4x4 space, you'll be absolutely fine. So how this one's going, I've just done the German turn 4, so the Americans are about to have their go at filling holes, and probably if I'd have filmed this at the end of German turn 3, I would have been sitting pretty confident, because Bastogne was just down the road, Houffalize was just over that next hill. We captured Saint-Vith, so all was good, and I had a pretty shocking German turn 4 where I seem to have rolled a very large number of 6s. The thing to get your head around in this game is that you want low numbers. I think in most of the other games high numbers are better. So yeah, when you get 6s in this, you're not actually chuffed. and I got 4 or 5 of them on the last turn, so that's really stalled the German progress. So I've got to do the American turn 4 in response, so they're feeling a little happier with the situation. They've got through the kind of panic phase and just going into this sort of mildly concerned phase. Not sure when they'll get to the confident phase. It's going to still be quite some time off, but it's got all the nice bits that I like with the series of games. The determined defence options is there. The CRT is similar. It's actually less bloody. There's less step losses, more retreats. In this one, the advances are knocked back a little bit, which I guess is reasonable considering the terrain that's involved. But you get two of these play aid cards, which do a very good job of summarising nearly everything which you need to know. So once you're happy with the rule book, you can pretty much just stick with the play aid card, and you're pretty good to go, I think. There's not much requirement to reference the rule book. So I'll take a bit of footage of the map, give you an idea of how things are progressing, and we'll take it from there. So these are this is my setup. I'll just pan back so you can see the maps there sitting quite nicely, which gives a fair bit of space down the edge of the map for the reinforcement schedule for the Americans and the Germans, and there's another bit of space there for the turn record track. And here you've got things like remnant counters for the multi-step units, and you can also break down some of the multi-steppers, which is a pretty key concept for the Americans at the start, where you need to be in sort of 6 places at once essentially. So you do need to break down some of your larger units, which in this game are essentially regiments and battalions. So compare that to mainly a divisional game on the Russian steppes. So in the south we've got the 7th Army, which was doing very well until just recently, where they've had a couple of stalled attacks. They had an assault battalion that was supporting the infantry. That was lost just last turn to add to their woes. So they were trying to break through to the southern map edge, because if you can get into these blocking positions, that seriously limits what the Americans do until in terms of bringing on their reinforcements further along the map. They have to essentially have 6 factors to oppose any Germans that get into this hex. So if you see the hex here, entry area A, if the Germans can get in there, then the Americans need to block that position with 6 factors before they can bring anything else on. So it's a nice mechanic. It makes the map feel a bit bigger than it actually is. It's quite a clever use of the off-map space. So that's the 5th Fallschirmjägers stalling at the gates of Ettelbruck. There's lots of bridge blowing in this game as well. You can't do it in the first 2 turns, but then blowing in bridges and getting back control with the infantry, then trying to repair and rebuild them is another key part of the game. And this is the essentially Panzer and 2nd Panzer on the main route up to Bastogne. That's another failed attack this turn there's an American combat command just in here, which is just able to throw its Zocs onto the road, which has been stalling the progress. So that's a few heroes of 9th Armour Division doing a good job. Houffalize, that was the sole successful attack this turn in terms of German progress, where they were able to break the American units that were on the road. And I think Houffalize is a fairly important junction because there's 3 primary roads leading off it, going sort of west, north and south, so that should open up the map a little bit for the Germans. And moving down you see St. Vith, which is just there, and 12th SS are making progress up the road now. Piper, there's also nighttime rules in this, and Piper's given an automatic bonus to be allowed to move at night. Otherwise you have to designate units that only move 1 movement point on the turn before if they wish to move at night, but Piper's got that as a standard bonus. But he's got himself down a bit of a cul-de-sac really. Not sure I've made the best use of him. Again, another 6 meant that he was stuck in this position. Really he should be more up towards the front. The Americans down here who are isolated, there are rules for surrender in this, but they're managing to avoid accumulating any surrender points, and the Germans have actually turned around the corner. There used to be a solid American line here, but they have actually pushed the corner in, and they are driving up the road. The kind of victory conditions include things like getting into Liège, which is just up there. Whether I can, it's Verviers, there's Liège. Give you some idea of the space they need to occupy. Or you can capture victory point cities, which are marked with these. Let's get an example. Clairvaux. So that's a victory point city, which is of course now well behind the German advanced forces. So there you go, another really nice game. I'm going to push this on. I was feeling that it might be a quick game for a German win, but now I'm not so sure. Anyhow, hopefully that has been of some interest.